Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first panel session of today. I am thrilled to be able to introduce, well, I'm not going to do the introductions. I'm going to introduce you to the concept of what our panel will be talking about today and lay the groundwork of some really interactive conversation with you. For the rest of the time. The idea will be that we've got 75 minutes together. About half of that time will be presenters, our esteemed panelists, doing their presentations about the best business case, the new business case for recruitment and retention of people with disabilities. And then we're going to open it up for questions, and we've had a lot of discussion about how we're going to do this. We're going to do it in two different fashions. We're going to have a roving mic around the room with a speakers list, but we're also going to do Slido. So if there is anybody who is using the Slido app, you can just punch in your question, and I can moderate your question at the end of it. I think the questions that we would like you to consider while listening to the panelists give their speeches and give their presentations is, what does the business case for recruitment and retention of persons with disabilities mean to you, and what are the key features? What skills do employers and businesses need in order to tap into the labor market of persons with disabilities? How can the public sector support and promote the business case and disability confidence? What can service providers do to help increase disability confidence with employers and businesses? And what resources and tools are needed to facilitate that process? And the last one, again, is very similar. What tools and resources need to be developed to help support disability confidence and recruitment and retention? And I'm going to expand that a little bit to what you heard this morning about the entire journey of employment, including advancement. And how can evidence inform the process to ensure a better outcome? So with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Emile to introduce our panelists, and I look forward to a very interactive 75 minutes with you.
Okay, welcome everybody. So it's my honor to introduce each of the panelists. I'll do that individually as they come up to speak. We have four brilliant people here who have lots to share with us. The first person is Brian Prado. He's a graduate of the University of British Columbia. Brian began his career with the Bank of Canada before joining the TD Bank in 2014. In addition to producing the Canadian Economic Forecast, Brian also focuses on day-to-day issues facing Canadians, including Canadians with disabilities. He also contributes to a number of TD publications. A really great one, which I think he'll speak to, was recently released about the profile of people with disabilities in Canada and the talent that's out there that we need to tap into. So he does a number of TD publications, and his commentary is frequently featured in financial media. So take it away, Brian.
Good morning. Thank you for the kind introduction, Emile. Before I get into I want to talk a little bit about some of the research, as mentioned, that I had conducted on the business case and more so the economic case. I want to start a little bit. If you heard that bio, you might be wondering how I got here, right? What is someone Bank of Canada background, thinking about interest rates, long-term growth, that sort of thing. How did I fall into this sort of research? And it's really a sort of a natural transition. The big question that always eats at me and eats at, I think, most economists here in the country is those challenges of long-term growth and the challenges around population aging, what that means for our long-term economic potential, long-term economic growth rates. And so when you look at this and you look at the aging structure, you look at what's happening or what will happen in the decades to come in terms of retirement of the baby boomer generation, the shifting up millennials, without any change, we're going to see a big downshift in terms of economic growth, in terms of that productivity potential. And so you start thinking about, how do we reverse this, or how do we offset this? And I was asked, have you looked at persons with disabilities? And to be frank, I hadn't, even just a year ago. And so I started this journey of looking at the data, looking at the outcomes. It's basically looking at the current state of play in Canada, and you think, my goodness, there really is this huge untapped potential here that really can help offset a lot of these challenges we're going to be facing in the years to come. You look at some of the stats, and I won't bore you with the stats, I'm sure many people are familiar, but you look at labor market outcomes, compare them with education levels, and you think, what's really going on here? This is such an obvious thing. And you think about what happens if you start to close those gaps. I mean, I'm not talking about fully closing them. We talk about like a third of the employment outcome gap or half that employment outcome gap. Reasonable, achievable targets. You look at that, over the decade to come, we're talking about, $50 billion in potential economic output. That's big money. That doesn't even include knock-on effects like changes in government revenues and tax, consumption multipliers, right? People that make money make more money. They spend money, right? There's a multiplier effect that lifts economic growth. And you look at employment, we're talking nearly 500,000 additional potential, workers in the Canadian economy. That's enough to think. I always think about trends. I'm an economist, so it's my life. You think about that trend employment profile. If you look at it now on business as usual, if you can bring this inclusion in, you're talking about almost 50% increase in that trend hiring rate. This is something that can really move the needle on economic growth. And it's so important because we know with population aging that the PWD population is also going to expand, right? So you have, as people get older, mobility, pain-related issues become more prevalent. And so from an employer and an economic perspective, it's not just about bringing employees in to offset some of those challenges, but also about that retention among older workers. So again, it's just this huge untapped resource that's so crucial for the economy that, it's almost one of those slap your head moments when I kind of did this of like, why are we not talking about this more? Why, am I, as far as I know, the only bank or only economist here really putting something out, at least in that bank lens? And so where it got really hard for me, because I love the numbers, I love looking at the data, was thinking about how do we actually drive this, right? So we know what the opportunities are. What are the tools and steps that we can do, that we can encourage, what's needed to get from here to there? We looked at basically 3 areas we thought were particularly important. The first one is the transition from school to employment. One thing that really popped out at me, I went to Waterloo for undergrad. For those of you that know, it's the birthplace of co-op in Canada, they call it, right? And so co-op's so emphasized, and you see a lot of the other schools moving into co-op programs. So I started sort of doing a bit of a research on lay of the land there. What I found was most universities have great accessibility departments. They have strong teams. Many cases are sort of at the forefront of ensuring the students have the resources to be successful. And in a lot of cases, these schools have these great co-op programs. They have these strong career counselors that are interacting with employers. And these two worlds, they're not talking to each other. So you have a student with a disability who's making their way through, may not be involved in the co-op program or may have difficulties accessing these co-op resources. And so you look at graduation time, you have someone that's been through that program that has basically a year and a half of work experience already under their belt. And so we're not seeing that linkage there that can really help bring those students up to an equivalent playing field, a level playing field with those other students. So that's one area we think you could see significant improvement. Also, sort of echoing, I think, what we've already heard, when I started doing this, the research, I looked at, what are the resources out there? What's already existing from a policy perspective, for an individual sort of navigating, their life cycle? Well, it's just this web, right? There's many different resources, government, non-governmental, and otherwise, employer resources, school resources, and it can be, I think, very challenging for individuals and their support, the people around them, to navigate all these different resources, all these different areas, particularly at life transition. So I think, again, echoing what's already said, that simplification, sort of single point of resource, a point of contact, I think really can help improve outcomes here. And then the final one is probably, I think, the easiest and the hardest at the same time, and it's about employer attitudes, right? We heard about, it's really simple because you think it's almost like, well, of course, inclusion by default, accessibility by default. But it's not really what we see. I'm not a spokesperson for TD Bank, the lawyers will tell you. So I can say, I could hype up for you, we're the only bank here in Canada that has an accessibility lab, right? We've had it for a while, ensures that the employees have all the tools they need. That shouldn't be something that we should be promoting. That should just be the standard at all the banks, right? That shouldn't be something unique. And it's those kinds of changes where you have, this is just the default setting, right? That inclusion, any kind of accommodations, it's not even an issue. It's the same as, all right, new employee, so we need to get them a laptop. New employee, okay, laptop and whatever else they need, right? It should be that simple. I think that's, again, the simplest thing, but also the hardest nut to crack. I'll kind of wrap by saying I'm cautiously optimistic. I've gotten a lot of questions here of like, well, it's been an issue for a while, right? People have known for decades. I'm new to this, but you talk to people, this has been a long-standing issue and these are known problems. Why should we be more optimistic now? My view here, it's a little bit flippant, is that it comes down to the baby boomers. We're at this point now, I go back to those demographics, where you have this major portion of the economy, of the population, that have a lot of political sway, they tend to vote, that sort of thing. And if you want to sort of maintain and keep the lifestyle they're used to, keep the promises in terms of pensions and other areas that have been given to them, you need to improve these economic outcomes. You need to have more inclusive employment, more inclusive growth. And so, if you look back through history, I've noticed the baby boomers tend to get what they want. And so you've got this powerful force here that should be pushing in the same direction. So I think right now, that you take all the other actions we're seeing, these amazing things in terms of government policy in other areas, combine that with the demographic factor, and I think there's at least a little reason for optimism, which is pretty encouraging. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. That's really helpful to get a high profile of all the possibilities and some examples of where we need to do some work. Our next speaker is Megan Kelly, who will drill down a bit more, looking specifically at the activities that she oversees in terms of helping employers and workers find matches and building up that disability confidence. So Megan Kelly is the National Corporate Relations Manager of the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, CCRW. She has been working with CCRW since 2013 and has been involved on varying levels of the organization's programs and services. Megan's most recent area of focus at CCRW has been concentrating in the business lens of disability and employment. So in her role, Megan connects businesses across the country, discovers their specific needs, develops customized CCRW services that will support them in hiring and retaining persons with disabilities. So Megan currently works out of the CCRW office in St. John's, Newfoundland. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you very much, Emil, and I'm super proud to be a part of this panel today with everyone up here. And before I start, I really want to say that I'm going to just break things down a little bit because I think we get caught up in what a lot of these words that we're saying mean. So like, what is a disability confident workplace? What is the business case? What are we talking about and how are we transferring that knowledge to the important stakeholders who are here and when we take them back to our communities? So when we are talking about the business case for hiring people with disabilities, it's something that I think everyone or else I guess I'll make an assumption that everyone in this room has heard about, right? But what we heard this morning, and I think a theme that's going to continue throughout these 2 days is that there needs to be a shift, and a really important shift, a shift in perspective, a shift in research, a shift in messaging, and a shift in knowledge transfer. So I'll just do a little bit of a background. The business case for hiring people with disabilities is based on a study done in the 1960s by DuPont. And this study showed that people with disabilities are so loyal, always on time, and will never leave. And so I know that sounds crazy to us now, but at that time, and the way that legislation looked back then and what work looked like back then, and culture, it made sense. But the world of work has significantly changed, and in a relatively short period of time. And we need to shift to a new business model and business case for inclusiveness and disability confidence in the workplace. So we are aware that this business case that we have come to know doesn't really work because we're positioning the problem as the person, but also because it doesn't address the benefits to business when their needs are identified and when the businesses themselves become the experts. And thus, we have disability-confident workplaces when that happens. So let's pull this apart a little bit more. And what does it mean to look at the business case through the employer lens? And why is it important? So last year at this conference, we heard a lot from employers. We heard a lot from big employers, from larger corporations, but also from small business. And we heard and we know that employers are adverse to risk. We need a business case that addresses this. We need to shift towards a business case that focuses on disability expertise and on businesses recruiting everybody based on capability, hiring the right person for the right job, and learning how to adapt for human reality. And the reality is, there's no real risk when a business hires the right person for the right job, when they look at the skills needed to complete the job. What if when sourcing talent, a business states that they need someone who can prepare a budget rather than saying that they need someone with a business degree? We need to take life experience as intrinsic to the ability of the person. So now we're going to dive into the needs employers have to ensure employment for persons with disabilities is a reality. And these pieces are important to ensure that the results are that businesses have the capacity to become disability confident. So at CCRW, the approach that we took probably about 3 years ago, I remember talking around the table in 2017 when this conference first started about the importance of business being, a stakeholder when we're talking about a strategy and talking about supports and talking about those important parts of the equation when we're looking at disability and work in Canada. And what we have seen over the last decade or more is that employment service organizations are doing really, I can't say really enough, really great work when providing the job seekers with disabilities. So doing that push, of the talent and providing one-on-one supports and services in a person's journey to return to work or break into the labor market. But the numbers don't lie, and that needle's not moving in terms of the unemployment rate for persons with disabilities in Canada. That's the facts, those are the numbers. So we still have a lot of work to do. And so how do we do this? How do we make a business case work? How do we create and support disability-confident workplaces? So we need to look, as I said, at the business case through the business lens, uncovering the specific and unique needs of employers and businesses, and develop individualized business case that will encourage a pull for the talent pipeline. And this business case includes a business case that minimizes risk. So we've heard this from our business stakeholders on various platforms. And a business case must be driven by employer needs, those needs being talent, services and support as it relates to disability, and planning for the future. A business case must also encourage innovation to address the current and future labor shortage. Last year, around this time exactly, BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada, who is one of the sponsors for the conference this year, they released a report that noted 40% of their clients, so their clients being entrepreneurs and small business in Canada, which Canada is made up of 98% of business in Canada is small business, that they can't find the talent they're looking for, and this labor shortage shows no signs of improvement. The business case must also lend itself to creating and supporting disability-confident and inclusive workplaces. So how do we, in the capacity that we're all working in, create a business plan that works for everyone? First, understanding that businesses are as diverse as people with disabilities. We cannot generalize a one-plan-fits-all. That we need to build on the needs of business, and this needs to be the framework. So building on the needs that I've identified, employers need talent. And as everyone in this room knows, and as Brian also shared with us, is that there is a large untapped talent pool of job seekers with disabilities. And to acquire this talent, employers need to attract and recruit. So strategies need to be developed that can help connect employers to ideal candidates and candidates that meet the recruitment needs of the business, cross-disability candidates and intersectionality candidates as well. Once the talent is harnessed, workplace or industry-specific training needs to occur to ensure candidates with disabilities have a competitive skill set that would allow for advancement. We also need to ensure training is available for recruitment managers, talent acquisition teams, C-suite level managers and CEOs to support their disability competence. We need to ensure that accommodation procedures do not create barriers. How long does it take a business to respond to a request for an accommodation? Recognize how important it is to have a proactive response time and the processes in place. Imagine having to wait 8 months for an accommodation in order for you to be your best self at work. And there are many systems at play here. We recognize that. It's procurement, facilities management, all those pieces. And lastly, retention. So addressing how businesses can successfully retain employees who develop a disability while working. And how does this all affect the bottom line of employment for people with disabilities? In saying this, we also know that businesses need services and support. So tools that will identify services and support for the entire workplace and tools that support the integration of procedures, standards, culture change, and general information as it relates to recruiting, hiring, onboarding, retaining, and supporting persons with disabilities and their entire workplace. Through knowledge, many employers are terrified of what they're going to say, if they're going to say the wrong thing. And with knowledge comes confidence and the ability to lead an inclusive workplace. In addition, the transfer of knowledge to senior management and all employees is critical for a healthy work environment. And lastly, resources, and not just human resources, but employer-based resources to assist employers in their journey to inclusivity. And employers need a plan for the future. We all live in an era of severe labor market disruption, and businesses that do not take this into account will not survive. Add to this a future where there is national and provincial accessibility legislation that will require compliance, and employers need to plan for this as well. So we need to build awareness through webinars, seminars, conferences like this, education, symposiums. That's really, really important. And a future process that will ensure the business has a procedure that supports all employees throughout their journey of employment, including the recruitment process. A process that incorporates an accommodation plan for any employee facing a barrier to be their best selves in their role. Developing this process is critical. 2 more minutes. And lastly, the business case needs to support the vision of business that will include hiring a talent pool of persons with disabilities, the right talent for the right position for their business. And so I've got a big stop sign being thrown at me, so 2 seconds. So it's just really important that we recognize the importance of the shift and start utilizing what we're hearing over these next 2 days as we transfer knowledge outwards to our coworkers and to the businesses that we're talking to other important stakeholders. And really what we're talking about is when the needs of business and the aspirations of persons with disabilities align, and then those matches will happen based on skills and capability, while recognizing how important it is to know what businesses need, to have those expertise internally, and to have disability confident and inclusive workplaces so that we do create that pull for the talent pipeline that exists in our country. And I'll end it there. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Megan. That great detail on how to build that employer capacity. And I like the way you emphasize the importance for them to do that in order to survive. So it's really critical that they build up this ability to be disability confident. Our next person is a spokesperson for people with lived experiences. Tamira Lohan is an accomplished risk management specialist with over 15 years of experience leading and delivering effective challenges to drive change. Tamira has had a breadth of risk management roles both in banking and insurance, spanning banking book, trading book market risk, model risk management systems, and contemporary risk, credit risk. Quite a bit there. I'm not even sure what half of these roles are. Tamira rejoined TD Bank in market risk management 4 years ago and recently moved to operational risk management, where she is accountable for operational risk management oversight for Treasury. Tamira is an inclusive leader who encourages diverse perspectives and approaches. She is active in diversity and inclusion committees at work and is a director on the board of Empowerment Council. Empowerment Council is a voice for clients, survivors of mental health and addiction services, primarily of CAMH. And so Empowerment Council memberships, board and staff are all current or ex-clients of mental health or addiction services. So take it away, Tamira. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to be focusing on my personal story and experiences rather than some of the focus of the other panelists. So to start off that, I will tell you a little bit about how I identify. I identify as a person with a lot of abilities, rather as a person with a disability, but I do identify as a person with lived experience. Really thrilled to see the emphasis this morning on the importance of having people with lived experience at the table and having diverse people with lived experience, because everybody has a different viewpoint and a different experience, and not everyone in any of the disability categories is going to have the same experiences or the same opinions. And to have a diversity of experience of people with lived experience is essential, I think. So I have had some both very negative and very positive experiences. Had a series of unpleasant experiences with discrimination, stigma, and a basic view of being less than. Primarily within the mental health care system, that's where I would say I experienced the worst, but also with disability insurance, and with a former employer where I was ultimately constructively dismissed. I don't think my experiences are all that unique. People I talk to have had mental breakdowns of any sort, often have great challenges with disability insurance, and many ultimately end up fired or laid off from their employer. So when I came back to TD, and I started my career at TD and left in 2005 to explore other opportunities, and came back a little over a decade later at the beginning of 2016, I had no intention of disclosing any of this. And by disclosing, my medical records will indicate I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So when I came back to TD, my intent was to put my head down, do some work, and I had no intentions of disclosing anything. I wasn't willing to put myself out there to be subject to that sort of discrimination again. But coming back to TD over 10 years later, I was really impressed with the culture of diversity and inclusion, and noticed that, we had all these great diversity and inclusion initiatives going on where, I would go and be impressed, largely panels at that point, or that was my exposure to it, where we'd have people coming and discussing this awareness. But I am a cynic at heart, cynic at nature, and I think I was even before I had the experiences to back that up. And so, I was still like, well, this is great, but, we can talk about it all we want, but what are we actually doing about it? So I think for me, the tipping point was when my broader team partnered with an organization called Specialist Sterna, and they're a recruitment firm that focuses on hiring people on the autistic spectrum. And so my team was involved. I was actually, I wasn't a direct hiring manager, but I was a manager of individuals who were hiring managers for that program. And so for me, that was the real tipping point that said, okay, we're actually committed to this. TD is willing to do something about this. And so that had a huge impact for me. Also, life circumstances helped too, and I did end up disclosing to my management And that was in 2017. And I had really good experiences with that. And ultimately, a year later, I ended up speaking on a panel, but really I was the one who initiated this panel and for Mental Health Week in 2018. And then I published a blog. So in the panel I spoke and I mentioned the bipolar diagnosis. I'm not quite ready, maybe I'm getting closer to put that on paper because depression is a little bit more, there's a little more appetite for it, but when you throw out a word like bipolar or schizophrenia, I don't think most people are there for it. So I was ready to speak about it in a room where it's verbal and I can control the messaging, but I'm not ready to put anything in paper. But I published an article on our website and also on my LinkedIn on depression, and got a lot of great feedback, a lot of great support, and a lot of executives, or a lot of people reaching out to me, including executives, you know, thanking me and telling me a little bit about their personal stories, many of who weren't out of the closet in terms of depression and weren't willing to speak about it yet, but were really grateful that I was. And then, now I lost my train of thought. But, so ultimately, these things were all great, but I think the one greatest thing and the most helpful thing for my mental health and for my healing and recovery was having someone that listened to me. And the fact that with all my experience with mental health care and doctors, the fact that that was a senior executive at a bank that did that for me, wow. Creating that space for me, giving me the message that my voice matters because I've been getting the message that it doesn't for so long for people in positions of authority, that was the most powerful experience. And I've gone from not ever intending to disclose, and now I'm speaking at a national conference on disability and work, so I don't know. And I was talking to someone who at TD has been instrumental in creating this inclusion and diversity, the teams, the spirit of it that we have. And one thing, I was talking to her a little bit about my experience in this interaction I had, and one of her comments was, well, we've created a culture that allows people to create that space, that to make mistakes, to understand that these are difficult conversations, and we're allowed to have them, and we're allowed to make mistakes. And I mean, I think when we talk about what do people need, what are the skills employers need, ultimately they need vulnerability, I think. And I don't know how much time I have left, but I'm ready to close, so I have time. Yeah, so what skills do we need? We need empathy, we need compassion, we need vulnerability, because these conversations were not easy, and in my opinion, I think they were a lot more challenging for him than they were for me. It creates a lot of vulnerability. And I will leave you with a quote from Brené Brown, that vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change.
Thank you so much. That's a great way to end your very honest and personal lived experiences and insights. Really valuable. Thank you for sharing that with us. Our last speaker is an academic who does a lot of field work, documenting people's experiences, insights, and knowledge, and translating that into some really incredible resources and tools to be used in the field of, supporting field work through evidence-informed resources and tools. And Rebecca Gurwitz is her name. She's an associate professor in the School of Rehabilitation at McMaster University. She's an occupational therapist with a program of research focused broadly on work disability policy, including workplace accessibility strategies and disability benefit systems. So Rebecca, take it away.
So one of the benefits of going last is everybody has already said everything perhaps that needs to be said, and there's not too much left to say. So I'm very lucky in that way. So thank you, and it's really hard to build on such incredible work. And I guess what I want to say is that we have been doing research in this area for quite some time, looking at the business case and trying to develop tools and resources for employers. And one of the things that I consistently come across is a lot of advocates and people with disabilities regularly saying we need to stop with this business case. And I think, Megan, you addressed this quite well, and you did too, Tamira. When we talk about the business case as being you need to hire people with disabilities because they're such loyal and great employees. And that's really probably what we need to move away from. That we need to really build on the idea that people with disabilities are a diverse group of people like any group of people. And some of them are great employees, and some of them are going to have great retention rates, and some may not. Some may want to move on because they're not a good fit for that workplace, and they're not working well with this team, and they're not happy where they are. So just like any other group of people, some are very loyal, and some are going to stay in the same job for a really long time, and that may not actually be a good thing, because when we're talking about that business case from the 1960s, the idea there that people were loyal because they didn't really have other choices, and that's probably not what we want to do with this strategy. So when we're talking about the business case, I think we need to have perhaps a business case 2.0 or 3.0 or wherever we are here, where we're really saying this is something you want to do as an employer because you want to be a good employer. And by doing this work, you're actually creating a good workplace environment for everybody. And that's what came out really loud and clear in the work that we did with the Mental Health Commission, is that when you're focused on building a healthy organizational culture where people are listening, where people are talking, where people are often opening discussions with the idea of what do you need to succeed? You need a laptop? Maybe you need other equipment. You need a quiet workspace. What do you need to be successful in this role? Those are the kinds of conversations we need to have with people. And the other thing that came out really loud and clear in the work that we did is that some of the skills that employers need is really around flexibility. And so what we talked about in that report was flexibility around where people work, when people work, and also how people work. So translating that to what employers need to do around the hiring piece, I think that we need to move away from hiring people into jobs who look like and work like the person who used to do that job. That maybe we need to rethink this assumption that this job has to be done this way. And go back to the skills, like Megan said. What do we want done by the person in this role? And can we actually think broader? What could be done in this role? And how could this be done differently? And maybe doing something different will be better for everybody. Some of the conversations I've been able to have over the last number of years, both at this conference and in some of the other work that I've done, has allowed me to interact with different HR professionals and health service professionals in large companies. And they've been able to share some really good examples of how people with disabilities in the workplace have actually shifted the way we do things in ways that helped everybody, that made a better work environment for everybody, that increased safety for everybody. So we need to leverage those examples and tell those stories when we're talking about risk. When we're trying to tell employers and teach employers how about the business case, that this idea of risk actually, the risk is that they might actually improve their workplace if they start thinking outside the box. So how do we do this, and how do we help employers develop these skills? And I would say some employers have these skills and are doing this, and we need to maybe share those narratives and share those examples. I think that's one of the challenges, is we can build tools and resources and training modules until we're blue in the face, but we actually need buy-in. And probably the only way that we're going to get buy-in is if we all come together, both employees, people with lived experience, employers, co-workers, and start sort of co-designing tools and resources and strategies and modules, and working together to sort of say what is it that we need. I think the other thing we have to do, that I've been hearing a lot about recently, is we need to move it back into the training. So in business schools, in HR diplomas, in design training schools, we really need to make sure that there's a component about diversity, inclusion, and disability. So that everybody sort of moving up the ranks has some exposure to thinking about disability right from the beginning as part of that design, as part of their own development. And then we need, I think, bringing people together, and that's where the service providers like the CCRW and other service providers across Canada who are really doing great work are really working on making sure that employer needs are met, making sure that people with disabilities and their needs are met, and actually bringing those together and marrying those two pieces. So that's really what I can add to the conversation. I didn't really have too much more to say, except for there was a lot of really good ideas on the panel around the business case, and really sort of pushing that business case forward and thinking through what that needs to look like 60 years later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. That was very insightful. I see that theme of training really being critical across the board for everybody, and making, I guess, inclusiveness part of the curriculum, for everybody who works in this field. So I just want to remind people that rumbling is the construction happening across the street, so don't panic. I think they're just drilling into the Canadian Shield here. And I wanted to let people know that this is Boardroom A if you're trying to get onto Slido for any questions. We're going to move on to the question session right now, and Maureen's coming back up here to moderate this for us. Thank you.
Emil and I make a great tag team. So we're looking for the roaming mic, and what we've decided to do, Ellen's got it in the back. What we've decided to do is we've got, so of course you might have questions for the panelists, and those are very important questions, and we want to hear your questions, but we also understand, and the theme of this conference is not just that you are sponges sitting in your seats listening to experts at the top of the table. You are the experts at your tables. And so we need to hear from you as well. And our biggest question, and it is on Slido, but feel free to answer this as well, either asking questions to the panelists for conversation, but understanding that our question to you is, what does the business case for recruitment and retention of persons with disabilities mean to you, and what are the key features? That's our first question to you. You can answer through Slido because that's how we're going to be collecting that information, but we are also going to be collecting it by note-taking if you wanted to answer that with the roaming mic. So at this point, we're going to turn it over to you for questions, comments, feedback, input. Anybody over here? And then Kathy? Kathy just wants to say something about Slido. Oh, and I will read out the questions. Oh, yes, sorry. If you've got questions, if you're not comfortable with the mic, please put your question on Slido, and I have it up on my phone, and I will be able to read it out loud as well. So, thank you.
I'm not shy, so I'll start us off by saying brava to Tamara.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for saying what was on my mind, and that is that the business case is not, I'm so glad to see it moving away from the super crip argument and what employers really need, other than, of course, what every other employer needs. What we really need to move the needle on that scale is exactly what you said: empathy and compassion, understanding, sensitivity, all of those things, all of the soft skills that business leaders don't usually think is part of their job, really needs to be part of their job at this point. The only thing I'd like to add is that we are speaking, you all, and us around the table are speaking to the converted. So while I think that the business case 3.0 is needed, and the time is not now, the time is yesterday and the day before and the week before that, but I'm glad to see it's here now. We need to take this conversation out of the room, out of the hotel, and into our workplaces.
Yep. Thank you.
So I'm going to follow on the comment that she just made. We talked about having management with empathy, vulnerability, understanding, sensitivity. How would you evaluate that when hiring new managers or new senior management?
Does anybody who feels comfortable in taking that?
Anybody in the room?
Or anybody in the room? So, should I paraphrase the question? So it's about making sure that when you've got a senior manager in the hiring position, right? Am I understanding you correctly? That they have the right tools and skills that they need in order to no.
How you want to hire somebody with those soft skills? How are you measuring that?
How are you measuring it? Sorry. How are you measuring the soft skills? So maybe the researchers in the room can think about this. How do you actually measure those soft skills?
So can I maybe,
Yeah,
I'm not
Rebecca.
going to address measurement per se. What I will say is that I think in the research that we've done, we did hear very few, but some examples of asset-based disclosure during interviews. And it may not be appropriate in every situation, but we did speak to an example I can think of is a high-level professional being hired in the public sector, described how she disclosed her lived experience with, in this case, mental illness, in the interview as an example of some of the skills that she would be bringing to her position, and was hired and felt really good about that process. So perhaps it's a little bit of reframing the way we think about our experiences with disability and the skills that we actually acquire by living through those experiences, and how we bring those to our employment. Now, it's not always appropriate, but I do think that's something important for us to be thinking about.
Right, the talent base. Okay, so we've got a few more. Oh, and Brian, please.
Sorry, I just wanted to add sort of a thought on that. I would almost flip it a little bit because I think it's challenging to know, particularly if you're bringing someone, a typical corporate structure where you have sort of what they call the Peter problem or whatever, right? Someone, you move them up into management, they're really good at that job. They may not have ever had to do this sort of thing. So I think what could actually help there is including, these kinds of outcomes as your measurables, right? So you say to someone, you're coming into this role, part of the expectation here is going to be performance, like anything else. The other part of it is you're going to be evaluated on these measures. Now, specific measures, that's up for debate. But bringing that into the job role itself, and of course, there'll need to be supports. So training should be made available and things like that. But I think making it part of the job, making it part of the job description, is going to be a good way. It's a little bit of a stick almost, right? That you're going to be evaluated on this. You need to understand these issues. You need to be able to work with those around you and those under you, in the way that they want to be worked with. Forgive me for being a bit obtuse with my language here. But I think that's another element of it too, right? Because it's, to some extent, you need that experience, that training, to be in that role. And so bringing it into the expectation, I think, can really, move things forward.
Thank you. Excellent. The new guy?
Thanks, Maureen. Thanks to the panel. A couple of questions. We're seeing a lot more research and data coming around the return on investment from an economic perspective, increasing GDP for recruitment and retention of people with disabilities, the consumer market of the spending power of people with disabilities. How do we actually start to really apply that in the context of organisations that we speak to? So whether it be a multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation and the prospective return on investment for that organisation versus a local community-based organisation with 5 employees. Is there any work that's come in terms of how we can really kind of take that overarching data, those large numbers, and start to apply it in the context of specific organisations, how it can benefit them in particular?
That's a good question. Brian?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a challenging question. One thing I found is that, it echoes the themes earlier, is the case studies, I think, are an area where we need more evidence, particularly in the Canadian context. You look at the US, there's definitely more research out there, more case studies available. So I think, success begets success. So, things like, employer networks, the, I was at Conference Board, what am I thinking of here? The chambers of commerce and things like that, making sure that, someone that has made that decision, that their successes are being echoed and sent to others. And I think even from the small business perspective, what's really kind of underlying a bit of what I found here is that, it's not really about, the right thing to do, right, that kind of argument. This is the profitable thing to do. This is going to be the competitive advantage for your firm, right? It's that sort of war for talent angle. You hear that sort of thrown around. This, I think making that case as well, whether it's a large company or a small company, that really speaks to it. That these challenges we heard, the BDC numbers mentioned, hiring challenges, I think those really resonate. You hear that, day to day, and it's sort of like, well, I've got actually quite the solution for you. Like, and talk to people, and these two things together, I think, really drives it. But I think the one thing that is missing right now is those case studies, particularly in Canada.
Yeah, and I think some of what you said is being recognized by the Canadian government as well, and it's being reflective in how funding is put out to organizations who are doing the work on the ground, with a recognition that there needs to be enhanced employer support. And this is coming from the knowledge of that, the government of Canada being that model employer, knowing that they need, the enhanced support to do the work that they're going to do in hiring 5,000 people, by 2025, and then recognizing that, okay, we need this enhanced employer support. 98% of the businesses in Canada are going to need this enhanced employer support. So we need to have that theme and that lens in the frontline work that all these organizations are doing across Canada. And I think you'll start to see that trend, really tap into those small businesses and bring the information from the top down, and it will really resonate. And we'll probably be able to start collecting those success stories, to start putting them out there and to build on conferences to come.
Do you want to go for it? We've got, with the fairness to Slido and the ones in the room using it, we do have a few questions here as well.
I'll just answer that question. In the work that we did with the Mental Health Commission, along with Emile Tampa, who led the economic analysis, we looked at different types of businesses across Canada, both small and large in different sectors. We only had a small sample, but among that group, we were able to profile some of these businesses and show that this return on investment seemed to be consistent, whether you were talking about an entry-level position in a small business or a professional level position in a public sector large agency. So I do think that we have some data that shows that in Canada, the return on investment is quite compelling in all those scenarios. Perhaps we need to build that further, show different examples. We probably also need to show it in different sectors, but I think there is some pretty compelling data around that.
Thank you. I see some hands in the room. I'm going to ask the first question on Slido, and then maybe, Ellen, you can keep going. One of the questions that has 3 likes on it, so it's the first one, is how can recruitment processes, especially automated ones, be changed so as to not screen out job candidates on the basis of gaps in employment history? I look at Megan for this one. I think she has the answer.
Well, it's a challenging question because technology is the way a lot of us seem to streamline processes and think that they're going to work better because they're faster. But what we've seen, and when we've talked about this around the table with other business representatives, is that the AI piece takes out the human when you're looking at recruiting. And when you look at AI, you really need to look at what you're screening out rather than what you're screening in, and how you can account for those biases that are within that process that you've put in. So if video interview is a component of your onboarding process or your interviewing process, what facial recognition pieces are there? Is it, am I making eye contact? Am I going to get screened out because I'm not making eye contact with this screen? Is that part of my culture? Is it part of my disability that maybe I haven't yet disclosed, but am I going to get screened out based on how an automated piece of technology has screened my skills, right? So what are we actually looking for when we're using AI? And are those the bona fide occupational requirements that we're screening when we're utilizing that piece of work? And it's a hot topic. AI in Canada employs a lot of people, and we get sometimes the importance of streamlining some of those processes, but we can't lose the human element of what it means to have those conversations and to know people's skills. So I don't have sort of like a quick fix on how to do it, but we know that this is a conversation that's happening globally. And we know that that's something that through works of organizations and conversations with business, that is something that we're talking about and looking to put some more of those human elements back into talent acquisition and sort of those onboarding procedures. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to.
Excellent. Thank you. Ellen, sorry, I had seen a hand in the back earlier. I'm sorry, Jen. Just at the back, Sean. Thanks.
Good morning. Maureen, there's a couple of things I think we also need to look at. I think that one of the challenges for folks is that what are we getting ready for? For so many folks, it's this constant, unending train that goes nowhere but around in a circle. I think it's about skill identification and job matching. When we talk about what the employer needs, very often when they give a job description, there's 14 things on the job description that are in every job description. So let's look more carefully at the skill identification for the individual. I'll give you a prime example. A resume is just a picture of that day. It doesn't represent any one person. So when we as agencies start to engage with folks to talk about work and employment, we really have to go beyond what's on that one page. It needs to be an organic conversation. And I hear what you're saying about AI, but the one thing I've learned is that in this process, it's those opportunities to have the conversation be organic. And when somebody tells me, well, I don't have any experience, but I did all these things. I don't have this listed, but I did all these things. And so we need to, this formalized piece is very important, absolutely. But so many of the folks that we see throughout our communities may not have a skill level that would be technical. They may have lots of other skills. So it's really about skill identification and job matching. Sell the skill, not the disability.
Yeah.
When we go in to see somebody, we're talking about the value they bring to the business. And it's almost, you get in trouble for saying it, but I want to say it here. businesses are in business to make money, not to employ people. So we've got to find the economic equation, which has already been made for us. The government of Canada says we need 325,000 new Canadians just to maintain our labor standards. I live in Newfoundland, not Disneyland, and our province is experiencing not only a out-migration, but a labor pool adjustment the likes we've never seen. So all across the country, we have provinces that their birth rate is now falling below their death rate. So what is it that we're going to do? We tell the employer, you need to do this because it's economically imperative for your business to survive. And we've also moved away from singular disability. Yeah. The one thing we do know is that diversity and inclusion is exactly that. Disability goes across all social groups, all of the other groups. So we've got to start trying to be more inclusive. I know it sounds a little ridiculous, but it's just not about disability. It's about inclusivity. It's not about getting the job, it's about getting promoted. So we've all done a great deal of work in this room for many, many decades. What we are at now is a turning point because we have all the things falling in line for us. The economy, the policy, the labor market changes. Now is the time to go back and tell your employers, that's okay, you don't want to hire somebody who's different, then you're going to continue to have these challenges and you're not going to be innovative. But I can help solve that problem because I've got somebody who can solve that skill. How they get to work is irrelevant. They can do the job you've asked them to do.
Thank you. So I'm going to do a Slido question, and then we'll go back to Ellen. How do you push employers to hire a person with a disability in a unionized workplace? And how can we get that language entrenched in the CBA? Anybody? There's an answer over here. Maybe we can run a mic.
Hi, I'm Amy Widows from Odin. I just want to say for the last 3 questions that have come up, just back to the business case studies for one, those business cases are currently being developed in Ontario. We've developed them. We actually work closely with Rich Donovan, who I'm sure a lot of people know that recognize that name. And he's actually working really hard at demonstrating actual statistics that identify to employers the return on investment and value. And you can read his book, Unleash Different, if you want to. Plug for Rich. Secondly, there's no union in Ontario that will turn down union dues. It's not very hard to, engage unions. We actually work with unions across Ontario that will tell you they will hire based on skill and ability, and it really doesn't matter as long as you have tone from the top.
Thank you. We'll go back to a question from the floor.
And my apologies, mine wasn't so much a question.
No,
I'm
comment.
Sorry.
Better, even better.
Okay. I'm on the employer side, so I'm in recruiting for one of the larger companies. And I believe you had a question about how do you measure for empathy. You had me brainstorming. So a couple of really quick ideas. Deloitte, they have a recruiter who's blind who does executive recruiting, which I think is awesome because you don't tell the dependent executive coming in, and all of a sudden they kind of get this, and you can tell far more quickly. It doesn't matter about the fancy watch or the kind of 3-piece bespoke suit you're wearing. You can tell their attitude in seconds and how they work and respond with that recruiter. So it's fantastic. Leadership by example. And a couple of other things that made me think about interview questions. Maybe this is something that this group can start to advocate for. We have behavioral questions that we ask in interviews. So tell me about your past experiences of coaching, developing, and promoting your PWD direct reports. I'd like to know. Because I in my old role, well, and no, but still, or how did you promote a colleague who had a disability? Those teach me a lot about how you see somebody. On my old role, sign language interpreter, I'd see one person stuck in a role and the manager saying, good enough for that role. I don't think they could do the next one. That's telling me a lot too. The other one, just basically asking behavioral questions. You could make up a what if you hadn't had that experience. How would you manage through a situation when somebody, not if, but when somebody comes through and says that they need some support for accommodations at work? And you can make up an example. Say somebody is going through a time or recently came through with a diagnosis. Can you give some examples off the top that you would think of in how to support? Should be the first thing is listen. How can I help? That person is a SME in their own strategies. How do you develop it together? What if you're a big enough company? Who is the person I go to ask for support? Those should be, if those questions start to come through, now I've got those ones I can measure. And if you have consistent questions, then you're comparing apples to apples with people you're looking at. One other quick comment, I think it was Sean at the back with the resumes. Again, my portfolio is Canada-wide. I do see differences in the quality of resumes that are brought to me. My entire focus is people with disabilities. Some are fantastic, others not so much. I had a great candidate who I found out in a roundabout way. She's got a master's of education. She's done 20 years in this fantastic space. She's getting support through ODSP. The ODSP person says, I've actually never worked with anybody at your skill level. You've got too much information in your resume. You've got to get rid of all this, and has only tried to get her jobs at the Walmart and the TSE store. Are you kidding me? Right? So if there's, like, I'll tell you my view, and I'm actually at the same Green Bank. 2 pages is an awesome resume. Throw in numbers, because that tells me quantity, scale, and scope. How have you had an impact? Great. The top, where you're talking, Sean, about what you've done, tell me the profile at the top with your strengths, because I get a lot of people with guidance from the agencies, PWD agencies. You'll be good enough and just try to get in the mailroom. No. Tell me your strength, because you've got to prove you're the best person in the room against anybody, right? So that's all. It's just, we can build up, I'm happy to build up the candidates, absolutely. How do we build that person up so that they can really shine in the interview?
Thank you. So we have 5 minutes left. I want to encourage everybody to the union question. Yes, of course, Elizabeth. And while the mic is getting to Elizabeth, I want to encourage everybody to answer the question on the poll on Slido. Again, if you don't have access to Slido, please come and let us know what your answers are so that we can incorporate this into our findings from today. Elizabeth.
Oh, I hate to be the person to hold the mic right now. So, from the union perspective, there are 2 things that people need to distinguish in their heads. Unions represent workers. Unions are not employers. This is what happens. So, for instance, in the federal public service, the employer is the Treasury Board, right? The Public Service Commission is the one running the jobs and all of that. They're the employer side, right? The union represents the workers. So when it comes to hiring, in that case, the unions don't hire, the employers hire. So then you have someone in my case where I actually work for a union, then the union, I come from the Canadian Labour Congress, but let's say that is my employer, so that I am hired by the union. But that is a very distinct 2 sets, and people should understand that. How unions can help is that unions, aside from these angry pictures in the newspapers and on your social media, we do a lot of work around equity and human rights. And in fact, we do a lot of work that we don't necessarily go out and tell the world unless we're invited to. So for instance, the Accessibility Act. We did a tremendous amount of work and we continue to do that. No one is going to be running out to any conference and saying, we did all this work. But we push in different ways to make sure that the human rights equity lens is there. we make it a priority within each local that goes to the bargaining table to ask for those rights. And I think that it's within the power of the representatives of the unions at the bargaining table to, first of all, I think that it needs to be made a priority to the people at the bargaining table. And if the union brings that to the bargaining table to the employer, that is another extra big push that can be inserted into the collective agreement. And believe me, you know, I invite you to ask questions to anyone from the unions you come across in your work, because some of the things that get negotiated into agreements is really quite outstanding. It blows your mind. And it's all in the protection of human rights and the rights of workers. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
I think that we can work together, and I think that we also need to push each other to make sure that the rights of workers with disabilities is up front, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in a collective agreement.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. And I think that on that note, and in the interest of time, we're going to end the group discussion now. I would encourage you again, the Slido doesn't close, right? So you can, it does close. Slido closes. So get it in. But I want to thank very much everybody on the panel for your expertise and for your guidance for this discussion today, this very important discussion. And I just thank you so very much for your time and your commitment. As you know, we are not giving out swag to the panelists because the funding towards purchasing swag has gone towards bringing people with lived experience to the conference. So thank you very much, and I thank you to everybody in the room.